She slept with a mysterious man and found herself carrying triplets. Little did she know, he was a billionaire CEO. Hey, beautiful people! I'm beyond excited to share this emotional roller coaster with you today. This story is going to challenge everything you thought you knew about love, secrets, and second chances. Trust me, by the end, you won't be able to stop thinking about it. But before we dive in, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments below, and let's see how far this story reaches today. There was a time I was out with some friends at a bar. As we were chatting and laughing, I couldn't help but overhear a conversation from a nearby table. A young woman was talking to her mum, and out of nowhere, she casually said, "I'm carrying twins." But here's the twist. She had no idea who the father was. Can you imagine that? The shock, the uncertainty, the whirlwind of emotions all at once. Something so life-changing, so unexpected, completely turning her world upside down. Now, picture this. Today's story is about a woman who faces a similar whirlwind of emotions after a totally unexpected encounter. She ends up pregnant with triplets. But here's where things take a wild turn. The man who fathered her children is no ordinary man. He's a billionaire CEO, living under a veil of secrecy, and everything she thought she knew about him is about to be turned upside down. If you're new here, welcome to the family. I'm so glad you found your way to our community. We've got a space where we share incredible stories, full of emotion, twists, and turns. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on anything. And don't forget to leave a comment with your country name. I'd love to know where you're watching from, and we can all connect and build this amazing community together. Now, I know what you're thinking. How did she end up carrying triplets with a man she barely knew? And why would a billionaire CEO hide his identity? Well, trust me, this story is about to take you on a wild ride, full of emotions, secrets, and unexpected twists you'll never see coming. But before we dive in, take a moment and reflect. Do you believe in love at first sight? Can one night really change your entire life? This story is going to explore those questions in a way you'll never forget. All right, grab your favorite drink, get cozy, and buckle up, because this story is about to take you on one wild ride. We're talking shocking twists, jaw-dropping moments, and emotions you won't see coming. Trust me, you'll be glued to your screen, and you definitely don't want to miss a second of this. Our story begins with Samantha Reed, a woman who has always been independent, successful in her career, but unlucky in love. Samantha had worked her way up in the competitive world of marketing and public relations, building a solid reputation as a talented and driven professional. She had earned everything she had through hard work, dedication, and ambition. But when it came to love, Samantha's success seemed to slip away from her. After several failed relationships, Samantha had begun to wonder if true love even existed. She'd once believed in the magic of romance, the idea of a perfect partner who would sweep her off her feet. But after each heartbreak, she became less optimistic. She began to question whether love was just something people talked about in fairy tales, or if it was something she would never experience. At 33, Samantha had achieved many things. She had a successful career, a comfortable apartment in the city, and a strong group of friends. On the surface, her life seemed complete. But there was still a piece of her heart that was empty, something that her accomplishments and social life couldn't fill. She still wanted to find someone to share her life with, the kind of love that felt like home. Samantha had been in a number of relationships over the years, each one leaving her with the same feeling: disappointment. There was Tom, who couldn't commit, and David, who seemed perfect until he suddenly disappeared without explanation. And then there were the others, guys who said all the right things, but ultimately didn't follow through. Samantha had put so much of herself into these relationships, only to be let down each time. It was getting harder to ignore the feeling that something was wrong with her. Maybe she was too much to handle, or maybe love just wasn't meant for her. Her friends often reassured her that someone was out there for her, someone who would be the right fit. But Samantha had started to lose faith in those promises. After all, if love was out there for her, why had it been so elusive for so long? The idea of finding someone who would truly understand her seemed like a distant dream, one that she no longer wanted to chase. Instead, she focused on her work, where things were more predictable. At least there, she could control the outcome. But there were still nights when Samantha would lie awake, thinking about what she wanted from life. What would it be like to find someone who really saw her, who would love her for who she was? The thought of it was both comforting and painful. She had almost convinced herself that love wasn't meant for her. After all, she was happy with her career, right? She had become so used to being independent, to handling everything on her own, that the idea of sharing her life with someone else felt both foreign and frightening. Could love really happen for her? Or had she already missed her chance? Samantha often asked herself that question. With each passing year, the idea of meeting someone who would truly change her life felt more like a fantasy. The world around her moved quickly. Friends were getting married, having children, building families, while she was still stuck in the same cycle, wondering when or if she'd ever meet someone who would make her feel whole. She had grown so used to being alone, so comfortable with the life she had built by herself, that sometimes the thought of opening up to someone else felt foreign. But deep down, there was a part of her that still longed for something more, even though she was too afraid to admit it. She had nearly resigned herself to the idea that maybe this was her life, that she would never experience the kind of love that seemed to come so easily for others. And yet, sometimes in quiet moments, she couldn't help but wonder, what if? What if there was someone out there, someone who could truly understand her and make her feel loved? One evening, as fate would have it, Samantha found herself at a fancy event, something she had agreed to attend on a whim. It was a gala hosted by one of the top firms in the city, and Samantha had no real expectation for the night. It was simply another event on her calendar, something to get through. She had no idea that this evening would mark the beginning of something completely unexpected. She wasn't in the best mood, work had been stressful, and she had no interest in mingling with the usual crowd of corporate types. Yet, as she walked into the venue, something about the atmosphere caught her attention. There was a soft buzz of conversations, a little excitement in the air that felt different from the usual stiff formality. Samantha couldn't help but feel a small spark of curiosity. As she made her way to the bar, searching for a quiet corner to settle into, a man approached her. He was tall, with dark hair that was neatly styled, and wore a tailored suit that made him stand out in the crowd. But it wasn't his appearance alone that caught Samantha's attention. It was the way he looked at her. There was something about his eyes, something that felt almost as though he was seeing right through her. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth but warm. "I couldn't help but notice you. I hope I'm not interrupting, but would you mind if I joined you for a drink?" Samantha felt a slight hesitation. She wasn't in the mood for a conversation, especially with someone she didn't know. But there was something about his presence, something calming and magnetic, that made her smile and nod. "Sure," she replied, trying to sound casual. "I could use the company." They exchanged names. Benjamin was his, before diving into an easy conversation. What struck Samantha immediately was how comfortable she felt around him. He didn't talk about the usual boring small talk, but instead, he asked questions that made her open up, questions that made her feel like he was genuinely interested in her. Benjamin was smart, charming, and had a way of making her laugh effortlessly. She found herself drawn to him, not just by his looks but by the warmth in his demeanor. For the first time in a long while, Samantha felt like she could just be herself. She didn't have to put on a facade or try to impress him. As the evening went on, they found themselves talking about everything and nothing all at once. Samantha could hardly believe how easy it was. Hours passed, and yet neither of them seemed to notice the time slipping by. Samantha had always believed that chemistry like this was a thing of the movies, something that only happened in stories, not real life. But with Benjamin, it was undeniable. The way he listened to her, the way he made her feel seen and heard, it was something she hadn't experienced before. Before she knew it, the event was winding down. The crowd was beginning to thin out, but Samantha couldn't bring herself to leave. She didn't want the evening to end. But she also didn't want to seem too eager. As they stood near the exit, Benjamin turned to her, his expression more serious now. "I know we just met, but I feel like we've known each other much longer." Samantha's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't deny that she felt the same way, but she hesitated. She had been down this road before. The feeling of attraction was natural, but she knew how easily it could fade once reality set in. "I feel it too," she said softly, almost surprised by her own honesty. They stood there for a moment, neither of them speaking, just looking at each other. There was something in his gaze that made Samantha feel like he was silently asking for permission, but she wasn't sure what to do next. "Would you like to grab coffee sometime?" Benjamin asked, breaking the silence. Samantha smiled, the spark of excitement she'd tried to suppress bubbling to the surface. "I'd like that." They exchanged numbers, and before they parted ways, Benjamin leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a soft whisper. "I'll call you soon, Samantha. I promise." Samantha nodded, watching as he disappeared into the crowd. She stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the evening settle in her chest. She had barely known him for a few hours, but there was something about him, something that felt different from anything she had ever experienced. That night, after Samantha returned home, she found herself replaying every moment with Benjamin over and over again in her mind. She couldn't help but smile at the way they'd connected, at how easy it was to talk to him. She knew she shouldn't get ahead of herself, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something special had just begun. The next few days were a blur of work, but Samantha found herself checking her phone constantly, hoping for a message from Benjamin. When it came, on a Tuesday evening, her heart skipped a beat. "Hey, Samantha, it's Benjamin. How about that coffee tomorrow morning?" She quickly agreed, excitement filling her chest. It was going to be just coffee, nothing more, but somehow, she couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting might lead to something more. Their coffee date was simple, yet intimate. They sat in a quiet cafe, their conversation flowing effortlessly once again. There was a magnetic pull between them, something that neither of them could deny. As the date drew to a close, Benjamin suggested they grab dinner together. Samantha agreed, and that night, over a glass of wine, they talked for hours. By the end of the evening, they shared a tender kiss. The chemistry between them was undeniable. The next morning, however, things felt different. Both of them knew that the night they shared was something unexpected, something that neither of them had planned. But as they parted ways, they both left with the same thought. Was this the beginning of something real? Neither of them knew, but they both felt the pull. Weeks passed, and Samantha enjoyed spending time with Benjamin. Something wasn't right. She had always been regular with her health checkups, but this time, something seemed off. A sudden wave of dizziness and nausea had started hitting her at random, and it wasn't like the usual minor headaches she occasionally dealt with. After a week of feeling under the weather, she made an appointment with her doctor, hoping for a quick solution. The appointment went as expected at first. Her doctor ran a few basic tests, checked her vitals, and began to take some notes. But as the minutes passed, Samantha felt more uneasy. She had seen her doctor enough times to know when something wasn't quite right. Then the doctor came back with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, Samantha," Dr. Harris began gently, "you're pregnant." Samantha froze. Pregnant? She hadn't even considered the possibility. She was on birth control. After all, she hadn't been expecting this at all. But what shocked her even more wasn't just the news that she was pregnant. It was the fact that she was pregnant with triplets. Her mind immediately started to race. Triplets? She barely knew how to process the information. Her heart began to race, and the room felt like it was spinning. She wasn't prepared for this. She had barely even known Benjamin for more than a couple of weeks. How could this be happening? Her doctor continued, but Samantha couldn't focus on the words. She was in shock, her mind overwhelmed by the new reality she suddenly had to face. How could she be carrying triplets? It was one thing to find out she was pregnant, but this was something else entirely. She wasn't sure what to do or how to even start understanding the situation. She thought back to that night with Benjamin, how everything had felt so right, so easy. But now, as the reality of the situation began to sink in, she realized she didn't even know who the father was. They had exchanged numbers, yes, and they had spent some time together, but what if? What if Benjamin hadn't been honest about himself? Questions flooded her mind. Could Benjamin be the father, or was there someone else she had forgotten about? The confusion was overwhelming. Her hands began to shake as she held the pregnancy test in her hands. She had no idea how to handle the news. She wasn't sure how to face the future. Her life was about to change in a way she couldn't have ever anticipated. The days following the doctor's appointment were some of the hardest of Samantha's life. She couldn't stop thinking about the news, the reality of it all, and the huge unknown in front of her. She had kept the news to herself for the first few days, not sure who to turn to. Her mind was clouded, and she could hardly focus on anything else. The thought of telling her friends, of explaining this strange turn of events, made her feel even more uncertain. The first thing Samantha did was try to contact Benjamin. She picked up her phone, typing out a message with shaking hands. She wasn't sure what to say, but she needed answers. She needed to know if he had any idea about what was going on. "Hey Benjamin, I hope you're doing well. I need to talk to you about something important. Can you give me a call when you get the chance?" She hit send, but as the hours ticked by, she received no reply. Maybe he's just busy, Samantha thought. I'll give him a little more time. But as the days passed, still no word from him. She reached out again, this time a little more direct. "Benjamin, I need to speak with you. Please call me as soon as you can." But still, nothing. No response, no message, no call. Samantha's frustration grew. How could someone just disappear like that after everything they had shared? The more she thought about it, the more she felt that something wasn't right. It wasn't like Benjamin to just vanish. The investigator she hired was professional and discreet. She didn't know how long it would take, but she was determined. Days turned into weeks as the investigator conducted searches and interviews, trying to uncover the mystery of Benjamin's identity. Meanwhile, Samantha's life began to feel like it was spinning out of control. She couldn't focus on work, her friends noticed she was distracted, and her mind was constantly consumed with thoughts of what was happening. What had she gotten herself into? The investigator came back to her after a week with an update. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Benjamin, or at least the man who had introduced himself as Benjamin, didn't have any known public records. No social media profiles, no addresses, no personal connections that were easily traceable. The only thing they could find was a registered company under the same name, but even that led to dead ends. Samantha was left feeling hopeless. Who was he? Why was he hiding? Days turned into weeks, and Samantha's frustration grew. The once comforting thought that she might eventually find Benjamin and that everything might eventually make sense had begun to fade. The investigators' updates were scarce, and, when they did arrive, were never as helpful as she had hoped. Each new piece of information only seemed to deepen the mystery. The man she had met, Benjamin, seemed to have vanished from the world, with no trace of his existence. There were no online profiles, no old friends she could reach out to, and nothing in public records that could give her the answers she so desperately needed. Samantha was now questioning everything she thought she knew. At the same time, her pregnancy continued. The triplets grew inside her, a constant reminder of her connection to a man she barely knew. The physical changes she was going through only made her feel more isolated. There were days when she felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of becoming a mother, let alone becoming a mother to triplets, with no father figure in sight. Desperation set in. The more she thought about it, the more she realized there was only one option left. If she wanted answers, she had to dig deeper. There was no turning back now. Samantha contacted the private investigator again. She knew it wasn't going to be easy. She had already spent a considerable amount of money, but she was willing to go further. She needed to know the truth. 2 weeks after her request for further investigation, the investigator finally came back with a breakthrough. Samantha was sitting in her apartment, anxiously awaiting the phone call that could change everything. The weight of the past few weeks hung heavily on her shoulders, but she remained hopeful. Maybe this time, the answers would come. When the phone rang, Samantha rushed to answer it. "Miss Reed," the investigator said on the other end, his voice serious. "I have something for you." Samantha's heart began to race. She held her breath as she waited for him to continue. "I've managed to uncover some information. The man you met, the one you've been looking for, his name is not Benjamin. That's an alias. His real name is Daniel Mitchell." Samantha felt a wave of confusion. Daniel Mitchell? The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. Who is he? What does he do? Samantha asked, almost impatiently, her voice trembling with anticipation. The investigator hesitated for a moment before answering. Daniel Mitchell is a billionaire CEO. He's the head of Mitchell Tech, one of the most successful tech companies in the world. His company is worth billions, and he's considered one of the most influential figures in the tech industry. Samantha was stunned. A billionaire CEO? She could hardly believe what she was hearing. She had spent weeks searching for answers, and now, the man she had met at that event, the man she had shared such an intimate night with, was no ordinary person. He wasn't just any man. He was a billionaire CEO, someone who had built an empire, someone whose name was known in high-profile circles. But why was he hiding his identity from her? Why hadn't he told her the truth? The investigator continued. Daniel has been living a very private life. His company is his focus, and he's kept his personal life out of the public eye. From what I've gathered, he avoids any kind of media attention. It seems that he's deliberately kept his identity under wraps. The reason why is still unclear. Samantha felt her head spin. She didn't know what to think. She had shared something personal and intimate with this man, someone who was, quite literally, out of her league in every sense. But why would he hide his identity? What did he have to hide? Why had he been so elusive, so mysterious? Why would he lie to me? Why wouldn't he tell me who he really was? Samantha asked, her voice filled with frustration and confusion. The investigator sighed. I can't say for sure, but I can tell you this. There's more to Daniel Mitchell than what you've seen. His personal life is shrouded in secrecy, and there are layers to him that even I'm still trying to uncover. It's not just about the money or his company. There's a reason he keeps himself hidden. But what that reason is, we haven't figured out yet. Samantha was quiet for a long time. She tried to process everything the investigator had just told her. The man she had met wasn't just a charming stranger. He was someone entirely different, a man with a world of his own, someone who had never allowed anyone to truly get close. She had been drawn to him, felt an undeniable connection with him, and now she was faced with the shocking truth that he had kept so much from her. But there was still more to uncover. Why had he been hiding his true identity? Why had he disappeared after their night together? And, most importantly, why hadn't he reached out? Samantha knew that she had to confront Daniel. She had to know why he had been keeping secrets from her and what he was hiding. But the deeper she went into his world, the more she realized that the truth wasn't just about him being a billionaire CEO. There were things about his past, his relationships, and his own fears that he had been concealing. The investigator uncovered a few more pieces of information. Daniel's past relationships were complicated. He had been burned before, betrayed by people who had loved him only for his wealth. He had been through heartbreak, and it seemed that the pain from those experiences had made him afraid of getting close to anyone. He avoided any kind of public attention, choosing instead to live a life that was shielded from the outside world. But there was still so much Samantha didn't know. What else was Daniel hiding? Why hadn't he reached out to her? And why, after everything they shared, had he disappeared? Samantha was determined to get answers. She couldn't let it go. She had already come so far in this search, and she needed closure. She couldn't go on with this uncertainty hanging over her. She had to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As the days went by, Samantha's obsession with finding Daniel intensified. She couldn't stop thinking about him. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face. Every time she thought about the night they shared, she was filled with both longing and anger. How could he have done this to her? Samantha couldn't stop asking herself that question. The more she thought about it, the more frustrated she became. How could someone she had felt such a connection with, the man she had shared so much with in such a short time, hide something as huge as his true identity? And even more unsettling, why had he chosen to keep it from her? She had been over everything in her mind countless times. Their meeting had felt so natural, their connection so real. The night they spent together was magical, and for a moment, she had allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, love could be this easy. But now, it felt like a cruel joke. She had given him her trust, and he had disappeared without a trace, hiding not just his identity, but his entire life. It wasn't just about the triplets anymore. The pregnancy was a life-changing event, yes, but the deeper issue was his deception. He had kept so much from her. He had kept himself from her. And the questions kept piling up in her mind. Why hadn't he reached out? What was he so afraid of? Why didn't he trust her enough to tell her the truth? The more Samantha thought about it, the angrier she became. She was angry at him for hiding behind a false identity, for playing with her emotions. She was angry at herself for allowing someone like him to get so close. He had treated her like she was just another passing chapter in his life, yet she had opened up to him in ways she hadn't done with anyone else in years. And the worst part? He hadn't even given her the chance to understand him, to understand why he had been hiding. Instead, he had disappeared, leaving her alone with a set of triplets that were about to change her life forever. But the anger and frustration weren't the only feelings Samantha was dealing with. There was a part of her that still cared for him, a part that still wanted to understand. What was he running from? Who was he really? She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than what he had shown, something deeper, something that kept him at arm's length. The weeks following the investigator's revelation were a blur. Samantha couldn't focus on anything. Every moment of her day was clouded by questions about Daniel. She couldn't let it go. She knew she had to do something. She couldn't just sit around, feeling angry and confused, especially now that she was carrying his children. She needed answers, and more than anything, she needed closure. It wasn't like Samantha to let something consume her. She was a woman who prided herself on her independence, on handling things on her own. But this was different. This wasn't just about herself. This was about the future she was about to build, the children she would raise, and the man who had changed everything. The investigator had done what he could, but it wasn't enough. Samantha had to take matters into her own hands. She was left with only one option. She had to confront him. She wasn't going to let him run away and hide any longer. If he wanted to keep his secrets, fine, but she was going to demand the truth. She needed to understand why he had chosen to live this way, and what it all meant for her and the babies. Samantha made a decision. She would track him down herself. She would find him, confront him, and demand the answers she deserved. Her emotions were running high, but she couldn't wait anymore. Every day that passed without knowing where Daniel was, or why he was doing this, felt like torture. She had to know. Who was this man? Why had he disappeared? She spent hours researching every possible lead, trying to dig deeper into his life. She called every number the investigator had found, and even sent messages to his business associates. She didn't know exactly where he might be, but she was determined. She was leaving nothing to chance. It didn't take long before Samantha was able to find more information. With the help of the private investigator, she learned that Daniel had been spotted in a few places around the city in the last few days. He hadn't been completely absent from the world, but he had kept a very low profile. He hadn't been to his company's headquarters in weeks, and there was no sign of him at any of his usual spots. Samantha was starting to feel the weight of the situation. She had spent days piecing together the puzzle, and each new clue only deepened the mystery. Why hadn't he told her any of this? Why hadn't he confided in her the way they had confided in each other during their time together? She had to face him. He owed her that much. She tracked him to a private residence in the city, far from where she would have expected a billionaire CEO to live. The place was modest, but something about it felt intentional. He had chosen to live far from the glitz and glamour of his public persona. It was like he was hiding in plain sight. Samantha knew this was where she would find him. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stood outside the building, feeling the weight of the decision she had made. She was about to confront a man who had turned her life upside down, who had lied to her, who had left her with no answers. But she couldn't back down. She couldn't let him disappear again. Samantha stood in front of the door, her hand raised to knock. She hesitated for a moment, her mind swirling with everything she wanted to say. But there was no turning back now. She needed answers. She knocked. The door opened to reveal Daniel, looking surprised to see her standing there. His expression quickly shifted to one of caution, but Samantha could see the recognition in his eyes. He knew exactly who she was. "Samantha," he said, his voice softer than she expected. "What are you doing here?" "I think we need to talk," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "You've been hiding things from me, a lot of things, and I deserve to know the truth." Daniel hesitated. He looked away, as though searching for the right words. But Samantha wasn't going to let him off the hook. She stepped into the doorway, refusing to back down. "I need answers, Daniel," she said firmly. "Why did you hide who you really are? Why did you keep this secret from me? And what does this mean for the babies I'm carrying?" Her voice was filled with frustration, her hands trembling slightly as she stood across from him. She had come all this way, through months of confusion, hurt, and anger. She wasn't leaving without some kind of explanation. Even if it was one, she wasn't sure she was ready to hear. Daniel froze, his face betraying a moment of panic. His gaze shifted toward the door, as if contemplating making a run for it, but he knew he couldn't escape. Samantha was determined. She wasn't going to leave without the truth. There was a tense silence that lingered in the air between them, a silence filled with the weight of unsaid words and buried emotions. Daniel stood there, caught off guard by the intensity in her voice, but there was no denying the truth anymore. He couldn't hide behind his walls any longer. For the first time, Samantha saw vulnerability in his eyes. The confident billionaire CEO persona was gone, replaced by something raw, something real. He wasn't the man she thought he was. "I never meant for you to find out like this," Daniel said quietly, his voice cracking slightly. He stepped closer to her, but Samantha didn't move. She couldn't bring herself to make the first move anymore. "Not after everything. But I'm not who you think I am." Samantha's heart pounded in her chest. She had been so sure of what she felt, so certain that the connection between them was real. But now, everything she thought she knew was crumbling. "Who are you then?" she asked again, her voice rising with frustration. "Who are you really?" "I'm Daniel Mitchell," he said softly, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I'm the CEO of Mitchell Tech, a billion-dollar tech company, the company I built from the ground up." He paused for a moment, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. "But that's not the only thing I've built, and that's not the only thing I've kept hidden." Samantha blinked, her mind racing to catch up with what he was saying. She had heard of Mitchell Tech, of course. Who hadn't? It was one of the most successful companies in the world, and Daniel Mitchell was practically a household name. But here he was, standing in front of her, confessing to something she had never expected. He was more than just a man she met at an event. He was a billionaire CEO hiding behind an empire built on secrets. "I don't understand," Samantha whispered, feeling a wave of disbelief wash over her. "Why didn't you tell me the truth? Why did you keep this from me? I thought we had something real." Daniel stepped forward again, his hand reaching out toward her. But this time, Samantha didn't flinch. She stood her ground, despite the confusion and hurt swirling inside her. She wasn't going to let him control this conversation any longer. "I didn't want you to love me for what I had," Daniel explained, his voice low, almost mournful. "I didn't want you to fall for the idea of who I was, not the real me. I wanted you to see me, the real me, not the man everyone else sees." Samantha's mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the pain that was just beneath the surface. But that didn't excuse the deception. Why had he been hiding all this time? "I've had so many people in my life who loved me for my wealth, for my status," Daniel continued, his voice heavy with regret. "People who pretended to care, but only because of what I could give them. I couldn't trust anyone. I thought that if I told you who I really was, you'd only want me for my money, for what I could offer, not for me, and that's why I kept my distance. I couldn't let anyone in, especially not someone like you." Samantha's heart twisted in her chest. She had always believed that love wasn't about money, about status. She had given so much of herself to Daniel, trusting that what they had shared was real. Now, here he was, telling her that he had kept his distance because he was too afraid of being loved for the wrong reasons. As much as Samantha wanted to remain angry, there was a part of her that understood what he was saying. Could it be possible? Could he really have been hiding himself because he feared the truth of who he was? "I never wanted to hurt you, Samantha," Daniel said, his voice almost breaking. "I wanted to tell you everything, but I couldn't. I was afraid. Afraid of losing you, afraid of being rejected. Samantha's breath caught in her throat. She had been angry, so angry at him for hiding, for running away. But now, standing here, she realized that maybe, just maybe, his actions were born out of fear, not malice. He hadn't wanted to hurt her. He had been afraid of getting hurt himself. Samantha's gaze softened as she looked at him, the tears she had been holding back threatening to spill over. So, all this time, you were just afraid? Daniel nodded slowly, his expression pained. Yes, I've spent my whole life hiding behind this mask, pretending to be someone I'm not. And when I met you, I thought maybe I could finally be myself. But I was too afraid to let you see the real me. I didn't think I could handle losing you, too. Samantha took a deep breath, her mind still racing. The man in front of her was not the man she had first met, the charming, mysterious stranger who had swept her off her feet. He wasn't just a man she had shared a brief connection with. He was a billionaire, a man with deep fears and insecurities, someone who had been hurt in ways that Samantha hadn't fully understood. For the first time, she saw the depth of his pain. But could she forgive him? I don't know if I can just forget all of this, Samantha said quietly, her voice heavy with emotion. You lied to me. You kept so much from me. And now, we're here, and I'm carrying your children, and I still don't know who you are. Daniel stepped closer, his hand resting gently on her arm. I understand. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I need you to know that I want to be part of this, part of your life, and part of our babies' lives. I don't want to hide anymore. I'm here, Samantha. I'm ready to be real with you. Samantha looked at him for a long moment, her heart torn between what she wanted to believe and the reality of the situation. Could she really trust him? Could she open herself up to him again after everything that had happened? She didn't have the answers yet, but for the first time in weeks, she felt the weight on her chest lift slightly. The truth was out there, and though it was painful, it was the first step toward healing. But was it enough? Could they move forward from this? Samantha stood still, her heart racing in her chest as she processed everything Daniel had said. His apology was sincere, and the pain in his eyes was real. But no matter how much he explained himself, the hurt she felt lingered. How could she simply forgive him for everything? She had trusted him. She had let her guard down in ways she hadn't done in years. And then, just as she thought she was beginning to understand him, the truth came crashing down, shattering the image she had built of him. Samantha wasn't the type to give up easily. She had built her career through determination and hard work. But this was different. This was about her heart, her emotions. And, more importantly, it was about the future of the triplets she was carrying. Could she trust him again? That was the question that kept echoing in her mind. As the days passed, the weight of Daniel's actions became harder to ignore. Despite the apology and the promises he made, Samantha was torn. She couldn't simply forget about the lies, about the time he had spent hiding his identity from her. She didn't know if he truly loved her, or if he was just stepping up because of the responsibility he felt for the babies. Did he love her for who she was, or was he doing this out of guilt? There were moments when she would catch him looking at her with that same intensity she had felt when they first met, but doubts lingered. Could this really be love? Or was it all just a series of unfortunate events leading to a situation neither of them had planned for? Their conversations were filled with tension. They would argue about everything, from his past secrets to the future of their children. Samantha wanted to believe him, wanted to feel that same spark that had initially brought them together, but the uncertainty made it hard. She didn't want to be hurt again, and she wasn't sure she was ready to open herself up to him fully. One evening, as they sat together in her apartment, the silence between them was thick, heavy with all the things they hadn't said. Samantha couldn't look him in the eyes. She didn't want to see the guilt that was probably still there. She wanted answers, but she didn't know how to ask for them without sounding like she didn't trust him. So, what now? Samantha finally asked, her voice low, almost resigned. She was trying to keep her emotions in check, but it was becoming impossible. What happens next, Daniel? What's our future now? Daniel looked at her, his face a mix of uncertainty and regret. I want to be with you, Samantha. I want to be a part of your life, of our children's lives. I know I've made mistakes, and I know I can't undo what's been done, but I want to prove that I'm here for you." The words felt hollow. Samantha wanted to believe him, but how could she? There was a part of her that feared he was only trying to do the right thing because of the situation they were in. What if his feelings weren't real? What if, in the end, this was just about his responsibility as a father to their children? What if he was doing this because he felt like he had no other choice? "I don't know, Daniel," she replied, shaking her head. "I want to believe you. I really do. But I can't just forget what happened. You didn't just hide who you are. You hid who you were from me. You lied, Daniel." He stepped forward, his voice pleading. "I never wanted to lie to you, Samantha. I never wanted to hurt you. I couldn't trust anyone, but I trust you. I trust that we can make this work if you'll let me show you that I'm here, that I'm ready to be the man you deserve." Samantha felt a tightness in her chest. His words were genuine. She could hear the pain in his voice, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. The doubt still lingered. "I don't know if I can do that," Samantha whispered, the tears threatening to spill over. "I don't know if I can just move on from everything we've been through. I need time, Daniel. Time to figure out if this is really what I want, and if it's really what's best for the babies." Despite the tension between them, Daniel didn't give up. He didn't give her space to retreat into herself, and in a way, that persistence began to soften the walls Samantha had built around her heart. Every day, without fail, Daniel showed up. He was there in the mornings, asking if she needed anything. He was there in the afternoons, offering to help with anything around the apartment. He even started coming to her doctor's appointments, sitting quietly beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. Samantha was both touched and confused. She didn't know what to make of his sudden, constant presence in her life. Part of her wanted to tell him to leave, to give her the space she had asked for. But another part of her, a part she hadn't even acknowledged until now, began to soften. One afternoon, they went to the nursery to start preparing for the triplets' arrival. Samantha had always imagined doing this on her own, but seeing Daniel take charge, making decisions about colors, furniture, and the layout of the room, was a strange comfort. He wasn't just doing this because he had to, he seemed genuinely invested in their future. He cared. "I think we should go with this color," he said, pointing to a light blue paint sample. "It'll be calming for them." Samantha looked at him, surprised by the care he was putting into these small decisions. She didn't expect him to be so thoughtful, especially not after everything that had happened. But here he was, planning for their future. Our future, she corrected herself. Daniel noticed her silence. "I know I've messed up, but I'm not just here to apologize, Samantha. I'm here to show you that I'm serious about this, about being with you, about being a father to these babies. I want to be here every step of the way." Samantha couldn't help but feel a small flutter in her chest at his words. She wanted to believe him, but the doubt still lingered in the back of her mind. That evening, after the nursery had been painted and the furniture was in place, Samantha found herself sitting next to Daniel on the couch, both of them exhausted from the day's work. He had insisted on picking up her favorite food for dinner, and as they ate in silence, Samantha began to feel something she hadn't felt in weeks: hope. She wasn't ready to fully trust him, not yet, but she could see the effort he was putting in, the small gestures that spoke louder than words. Daniel wasn't just apologizing for his mistakes. He was proving with his actions that he was serious about being in her life and the lives of their children. Daniel's actions were speaking louder than his words ever could. He showed up, day after day, without fail. It wasn't just the physical presence he brought, it was the emotional commitment. Samantha still wasn't sure if she could trust him completely, but one thing she knew for sure, he wasn't going anywhere. Daniel was here, in every way that mattered, trying to make up for the mistakes he had made. The nights were the hardest. As the weeks passed, the late hours spent in the nursery were filled with deep, meaningful conversations. One night, after they had finished organizing the crib and placing the final touches on the room, Samantha found herself sitting beside Daniel, exhausted but content. The room looked beautiful, but there was still something missing, a part of the puzzle that still hadn't been put together. Daniel sat next to her. His usual confident demeanor softened. Samantha saw something in his eyes that she hadn't noticed for some time. a deep vulnerability that she hadn't expected to see from the billionaire CEO she had come to know. It was a look she hadn't seen since that first night they met, the night he had allowed himself to be vulnerable with her. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Daniel said quietly, breaking the silence between them. He sounded tired, the weight of the world in his voice. "I know I've hurt you, and I know that my actions, no matter how hard I try to make things right, can never change the past. But I need you to know why I've been the way I am, why I've pushed people away for so long." Samantha didn't say anything, but she listened intently, her eyes fixed on him. She could feel the rawness in his words, the sincerity. "I've always had this fear, Samantha," Daniel continued, his voice growing softer. "I've been living with it for as long as I can remember, the fear of being alone. Not just because I've spent my entire life building something, but because I've always felt like I had to keep everything at arm's length. I'm constantly surrounded by people who want something from me, who need something from me. But the truth is, I've been lonely for years. I've pushed everyone away, even the people I care about. And it's not because I don't want to connect. It's because I've been terrified of trusting anyone. Terrified that if I let someone in, they would just want me for my money, or for what I could give them, not for who I really am." Samantha's heart ached as she listened to his words. She had always believed that Daniel's life was perfect, that his wealth and status had made everything easier for him. But now, as he spoke of his fears and his loneliness, she realized just how much he had been carrying alone. She couldn't imagine the pressure he must have felt, the weight of the world resting on his shoulders. And as much as she had resented him for keeping his secrets, she couldn't ignore the fact that he was a man who had been running from his own fears. "I've been afraid for so long, Samantha," Daniel continued, his voice shaking with emotion. "Afraid of opening up, afraid of letting anyone get too close. But when I met you, I didn't feel that way. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could actually be myself. Like maybe, just maybe, I could have something real. But I screwed it up. I didn't trust you. I didn't trust myself. And now, I don't know if I can ever fix what I've done." Samantha felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at him. Again, she saw the man behind the billionaire CEO persona. She saw the man who was afraid, who had spent so long hiding behind his success. And in that moment, something inside her began to shift. She had always believed that love should be simple, that it should be built on trust and honesty. And now, here was Daniel, opening up to her in a way that she hadn't expected. He wasn't perfect, and neither was she, but for the first time, Samantha realized that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. She took a deep breath and reached out, her hand finding his. "You're not alone, Daniel," she said softly. "You don't have to push everyone away. I'm here. I want to be here for you, for us, for the babies." Daniel looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and relief. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to smile. It was small, but it was real. "I don't deserve you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "But I'll spend every day trying to prove that I do." Samantha squeezed his hand, her heart warming as she realized something important. She wasn't just accepting him for who he was, she was beginning to see him as someone she could build a future with. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be perfect, but maybe that was okay. Maybe they didn't need to be perfect. Maybe they just needed to try. In that moment, as she sat next to Daniel, her hand in his, Samantha saw the real him, the man she had been afraid to trust, the man she had thought was hidden behind his wealth and status. But as he opened up to her, she began to see beyond the facade. The man before her wasn't just a CEO. He was someone capable of love, of vulnerability, of growth. Samantha realized that maybe she had been too quick to judge him. She had let her anger cloud her judgment, and now, as she listened to him speak, she could see the man he wanted to be, the man he was trying to become. The fear and loneliness that had once controlled him was still there, but they didn't have to define him anymore. For the first time, Samantha let her guard down. She could feel her heart soften, and the walls she had spent so long building up began to crumble. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. They had a chance, a real chance. And as she looked at Daniel, she realized that maybe they could build something together, something real. It wasn't going to be easy, it wasn't going to be perfect, but they could make it work. They could overcome their past mistakes, their fears, and their insecurities, together. Samantha leaned in and kissed him, a soft, tender kiss that spoke volumes. In that moment, the world outside seemed to disappear. It was just the two of them, sitting in the nursery they had created for their children, ready to take on the future together. The day had finally come. Samantha's breath was short and ragged, and her heart pounded in her chest. Every second felt like a lifetime as she lay there, the pain of childbirth taking hold of her body. It was a day she had both anticipated and feared, the day she would finally meet the children she had carried inside her for so long, the day that would change everything. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the occasional murmur of the nurses and doctors. But for Samantha, everything else faded away as she focused on what was happening right in front of her. She gripped the edge of the hospital bed tightly, her hands trembling, but her mind was clear. She was about to become a mother of 3. Daniel was there by her side, just as he had promised he would be. Through every step of this journey, he had been there, supporting her in ways she never thought possible. The man who had once been a stranger, the man who had kept so much from her, was now holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement. He hadn't just shown up physically, he had shown up emotionally. She had seen him grow in ways she hadn't expected. He was no longer the man who hid behind his wealth and status. He was the man who stood beside her, not just as a father-to-be, but as a partner. As they prepared for the arrival of their triplets, Samantha could feel a sense of peace in her heart. This was real. This was happening. Her body tensed, and she let out a deep breath. The doctor gave her a reassuring smile, and the nurses moved around her, assisting as needed. Samantha focused on the sound of Daniel's voice, his hand warm in hers, as he whispered to her softly. "You're doing great," he said, his voice steady and calm, even though Samantha could see the tension in his eyes. "I'm right here. We're doing this together." Samantha squeezed his hand tighter. She was exhausted, but she couldn't focus on anything except the sound of Daniel's voice and the promise he had made to her. They were doing this together. The minutes stretched on like hours, but slowly, the pain got better, replaced by a strange sense of anticipation. Then, after what felt like a lifetime, the sound that Samantha had been waiting for filled the room, the soft cry of a baby. The first triplet had arrived. She looked over at Daniel, whose face was a mixture of awe and disbelief. Tears welled up in his eyes as he gazed down at their baby. He hadn't said a word yet, but his face spoke volumes. Samantha could see how much this moment meant to him. This was it. This was what they had been working toward. "Look at her," Daniel whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He gently stroked the baby's tiny hand as the nurse carefully placed the newborn in Samantha's arms. Samantha's heart swelled as she gazed down at their daughter, the one who had started it all. She could barely hold back the tears as she looked at this tiny life in her arms. This was what it was all about. Not money, not fame, family. The second baby arrived, followed by the third. One by one, the triplets came into the world, their cries filling the room. Each one was perfect in their own way, each one a miracle. Daniel couldn't stop staring at them, his heart full. His hands were shaking as he gently touched each of their tiny faces. "They're perfect," he whispered, a tear escaping down his cheek. "You did this, Samantha. You're incredible." Samantha looked at him, her heart overflowing. She had never seen him like this before. The man who had once been so afraid of love, so afraid of letting anyone in, was now overcome with emotion. He had tears in his eyes, but this time it wasn't out of fear or regret. It was out of love, pure love. As Daniel looked down at their 3 newborn babies, something inside him shifted. It wasn't just the awe and wonder of becoming a father, it was more than that. Holding his children in his arms, Daniel realized something that had been missing from his life for so long. For years, he had chased success, built an empire, and gathered wealth, but none of it had ever given him the fulfillment he had hoped for. His accomplishments felt hollow compared to the love he now saw in Samantha's eyes, in the eyes of their children. Nothing had ever mattered as much as this moment. Nothing could ever compare to the feeling of holding his babies in his arms. As the nurse carefully placed each of the triplets in his arms, Daniel's heart swelled. His tears continued to fall, but this time, they were different. They were tears of joy, tears of gratitude. For so long, he had believed that wealth and status were everything, but now, in the quiet of that hospital room, surrounded by the people he loved, he knew that none of that mattered. Family mattered. Love mattered. Daniel looked at Samantha, his eyes full of admiration. "We did it," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "We really did it." Samantha smiled through her tears, her eyes locking with his. She had never seen him like this before. This was the man she had been waiting for, the man who had finally let go of his fears and embraced love. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "We did it, Daniel," she said softly. "Together." The triplets' arrival marked the beginning of something new, not just for Samantha and Daniel, but for their family. Their life together wasn't going to be perfect. There would be struggles, challenges, and obstacles. But in that moment, none of that seemed important. They had everything they needed right there, each other and their beautiful children. As Daniel held one of their daughters, he looked down at her, a soft smile playing at the corners of his lips. "You'll never have to worry about anything," he whispered. "I'll always be here, for you, for your sisters, for Samantha." As the days passed, Daniel and Samantha's bond grew stronger. The triplets brought them closer than they had ever been, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt like he had found the one thing that had been missing from his life. He was no longer just a CEO. He was a father, he was a partner, he was part of something much bigger than himself. Their days were filled with the laughter and cries of their newborns, but there was also a quiet joy in the little moments, the late-night feedings, the soft sounds of a lullaby, the shared looks between Daniel and Samantha as they worked together to care for their children. It wasn't easy, but it was real, and that was enough. Daniel spent his days making plans for their future, but not just the future of his company. He was now making plans for his family. The money he had worked so hard to earn, the success he had achieved, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered now was building a life with Samantha and their children. As they settled into their new life as parents, Daniel realized that everything he had worked for was just a stepping stone to this moment. He had spent so many years building his empire, thinking that it would bring him happiness, but now he knew that happiness came from something far more precious: love, true love. And as he watched Samantha care for their triplets, Daniel felt a sense of peace that he had never known before. The world outside could be as chaotic as it wanted. As long as he had Samantha and their children, he was content. They had made it through the storm, and now they were ready to begin again. As the months passed, Samantha and Daniel's bond grew stronger. They had been through so much, from secrets and lies to the joy of welcoming their 3 beautiful babies into the world. The pain of the past still lingered, but it no longer controlled them. They were learning how to love each other in ways they hadn't before, deeper, truer, and with an understanding that had come from facing their fears and insecurities together. There was no denying the challenges they faced, the sleepless nights, the cries of the babies that seemed endless, the exhaustion that seeped into every corner of their lives. But despite all of that, there was also something that had started to feel natural between them: support. They were no longer just 2 people trying to figure it all out on their own. They were partners, building a life together, one small victory at a time. Samantha had always believed that love required effort. It wasn't something that just happened magically, and now, as she looked at Daniel, she realized how much effort they had put into their relationship. But it had been worth it. Every late-night conversation, every shared moment of frustration or joy had brought them closer. They had learned how to communicate with each other, how to support one another through both the easy and the difficult moments. At first, there had been so many unanswered questions, so many doubts and fears that still lingered in Samantha's heart. She wasn't sure if she could ever truly trust Daniel after everything that had happened. But now, as she watched him interact with their children, holding them gently, soothing them during their midnight cries, laughing with them during the day, she saw a side of him that made her believe in their future, the side of him that wasn't just the billionaire CEO, but the man who loved her and their children with all his heart. It wasn't always easy. There were days when they both felt overwhelmed by the weight of parenthood, when they argued about something small, like the best way to calm a crying baby or whether to let them sleep in the nursery or their room. But even in those moments of tension, they learned to work through it. They communicated, even when it was hard, and they learned to listen to each other. There were nights when Daniel stayed up late, helping Samantha feed the babies, even though he had a full day of meetings ahead of him. He would take turns with her, rocking the babies to sleep, and though exhaustion clouded his eyes, there was something else there, a sense of purpose. He had a family now. His responsibilities had changed, but he didn't mind. This was what mattered. Samantha, too, had her moments of doubt. There were times when she felt like she was losing herself in the whirlwind of motherhood. It was hard to balance everything, her personal needs, her career, and her new role as a mother to 3 children. But every time she looked at Daniel, she remembered why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. He was her partner, her equal, and no matter how difficult the days got, they were in it together. The journey wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and they had each other. They had built something real, something that wasn't just about the triplets, but about them as a couple, about their love, their commitment, and the family they were creating. One night, after a long day of taking care of the babies, Daniel and Samantha found themselves sitting outside on the porch, the cool evening air brushing against their skin. The house was quiet now, the triplets finally asleep in their nursery, tucked into their cribs with soft blankets wrapped around them. The world outside seemed still, peaceful, almost as if everything had come full circle. The chaos of the past few months, the emotional roller coaster of their relationship, had finally given way to something beautiful, something real. And in that moment, as they sat together in silence, Daniel realized that this was what he had been searching for all along. Samantha turned to him, a small smile on her face. The moonlight illuminated her features, making her look even more beautiful than she did in the light of day. And Daniel realized, in that instant, that she was everything he had ever wanted. He had spent so much of his life trying to prove himself to others, trying to hide behind his wealth and status. But now, sitting next to the woman he loved, holding their children in the nursery, he knew that none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was her. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Samantha looked at him in surprise, her heart suddenly racing. He hadn't said anything, but the look in his eyes said everything. "Samantha," Daniel began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've spent so many years trying to find something real, something that wasn't just about wealth or status. And in you, I found that. I found the love I never thought I deserved. You've taught me what it means to love and to be loved." Samantha's eyes widened, her heart beating faster. She wasn't sure where this was going, but she had a feeling she knew. Daniel opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring, the diamond glinting in the moonlight. "I don't want to wait any longer," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building a future together, with our children and our love. Will you marry me, Samantha?" Tears welled up in Samantha's eyes as she looked at the man who had become her everything. This was the man she had almost given up on, the man she had once been afraid to trust. And now, here he was, asking her to spend the rest of her life with him, not because of his wealth or status, but because he truly loved her. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Daniel, I'll marry you." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, everything stood still. Samantha's heart was racing, her emotions swirling in a mixture of joy, disbelief, and overwhelming love. She had never imagined that this would be the moment that would define their future together, but here they were. Daniel's face lit up, the most genuine smile spreading across his features as he reached for her hand. He had spent so long hiding behind his wealth, afraid to show the world who he really was, but now, in this moment, there was no hiding. He was a man in love, a man ready to commit to a life he had never dared to dream of. The ring sparkled in the moonlight, a symbol of their promise, their future, and the life they were going to build together. Samantha didn't need any grand gesture, any lavish celebration. The quiet sincerity of the moment, the love they shared, the life they had fought for, was all she needed. And Daniel had shown her, in the simplest of ways, that he was willing to fight for her, for them, for their children. As the days turned into weeks, the whirlwind of excitement around their engagement settled into something quieter, more intimate. They began planning their future together, but it wasn't just about the wedding. It was about their life as a family, about what kind of parents they would be, and what kind of legacy they wanted to leave behind. Samantha had always been independent, never wanting to rely on anyone. But now, with Daniel by her side, she realized that they didn't have to do everything alone. They could be partners in every sense of the word. Daniel wasn't just the man she had once feared would let her down. He had proven himself to be someone who would walk beside her through every challenge and celebrate every victory. The triplets were growing every day, filling their home with laughter and chaos. There were moments when everything seemed overwhelming, the sleepless nights, the endless feedings, the diapers, but there were also moments that made it all worth it. The first time one of the babies smiled at Daniel, or when Samantha watched him gently rock the babies to sleep, whispering soft lullabies. Life was far from perfect, but for the first time, Samantha felt like they were on the right path. The wedding day arrived sooner than they had expected, and it was everything they had dreamed of. It wasn't a grand, lavish event filled with thousands of guests. Instead, it was an intimate ceremony, surrounded by the people who mattered most, their closest family and friends. It was simple, but it was perfect. Samantha walked down the aisle, her heart in her throat, her eyes locked on Daniel at the altar. He stood there, looking at her with so much love in his eyes that she thought she might burst into tears. The man who had once been so distant, so afraid to let anyone in, was now the man standing there, ready to promise her his heart, his love, and his life. As they exchanged vows, Daniel held her hands tightly, his voice strong and steady as he promised to love her, to stand by her side, and to build a life with her, no matter what obstacles they faced. Samantha's heart swelled as she promised to love him, to trust him, and to be the partner he deserved. They were no longer two separate people, each carrying the weight of their pasts. They were one, united in love, in purpose, and in family. The day they were married, Daniel finally understood something he had never fully grasped before. Wealth and status were fleeting. They could be taken away in an instant. But love, real love, was something that couldn't be bought. It was built on trust, on shared experiences, and on the willingness to be vulnerable with each other. He wasn't the mysterious billionaire CEO anymore. He wasn't hiding behind his business or his success. He was a devoted husband, a loving father, and someone who had finally found peace. The man standing beside Samantha at the altar wasn't just a businessman. He was the man who had learned what it meant to love unconditionally. As they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, Daniel realized that the family they had created wasn't just the life he had dreamed of. It was more than that. It was a life full of purpose, a life full of meaning. His wealth couldn't define him anymore. The love they had for each other, the love they shared with their children, that was what mattered now. The transformation wasn't just about the way he saw himself. It was about how he saw the world. And in that moment, as he looked at Samantha and their newborn children, he knew that he had everything he had ever wanted. They were a family, and that was all that mattered. In the months that followed, Samantha and Daniel settled into their new life as a married couple and parents. The days were filled with the joy and challenges of raising triplets, but there was a sense of peace that came with it. They had faced the hardest parts of their relationship, the lies, the fears, and the secrets, and had come out the other side stronger for it. Their home was filled with love, laughter, and the occasional chaotic moment, as three babies each demanded attention at the same time, but Daniel and Samantha had learned how to navigate these moments together. They worked as a team, their bond growing stronger every day. Daniel was able to be the man Samantha needed him to be, the man who loved her without reservation, the man who would do anything to protect their family. Samantha, too, had grown in ways she hadn't expected. She had learned to trust again, to let go of the past, and embrace the future. She had learned that love wasn't just about fairy tales. It was about real people, real struggles, and the willingness to fight for each other, no matter what. They weren't perfect, but they didn't need to be. They had each other, they had their family, and together, they knew they could face anything that came their way. As the years passed, Daniel and Samantha continued to build their life together. They traveled, laughed, and made countless memories as a family. Their love only deepened, and their commitment to each other grew stronger with every passing day. Daniel's company continued to thrive, but he no longer let it consume him. He learned to balance his career with his family life, knowing that his true success wasn't measured by the size of his bank account or the number of deals he closed. It was measured by the love he shared with Samantha and their children. Samantha, too, found fulfillment in her career, but she knew that the most important thing in her life was the family they had created. She was proud of the life they had built, one that was filled with love, trust, and a deep connection that nothing could break. Together, they had come full circle. From the first moment they met, to the struggles they faced, to the love they had built, Samantha and Daniel had created something real, something that would last. And in that moment, they both knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together as a family. As the years passed, Samantha and Daniel's life together continued to evolve. The challenges they had faced, both as individuals and as a couple, no longer seemed so overwhelming. They had grown, learned, and changed in ways they hadn't expected. The early days of uncertainty and fear were far behind them, replaced by a bond that was unbreakable. Samantha sat on the porch one evening, her eyes fixed on the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, and the cool evening breeze brushed against her skin. The triplets were inside, playing with their toys, and Daniel was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. The house was filled with the hum of normalcy, the rhythm of a life that they had built together, brick by brick. As she sat there, alone with her thoughts, she couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come, how far she had come. She thought about the woman she had been when she first met Daniel, a woman who was scared of love, a woman who had built walls around her heart, afraid of letting anyone in. She had believed that love was just a fairy tale, something that only happened to other people. She had experienced too much disappointment to think otherwise. But then Daniel came into her life, unexpectedly, and at a time when she least expected it. At first, it was all too good to be true. He was everything she had wanted in a partner, charming, successful, and confident. But as the story unfolded, she realized that there was so much more to him than just the man he appeared to be. He had his own fears, his own struggles. He had hidden behind his wealth and status because he was afraid of being vulnerable, of being hurt. And through it all, Samantha had to learn how to trust again, to let go of her own fears, and to open her heart to someone who had shown her a kind of love she had never known. In the beginning, she had questioned if she could truly love him, if he could truly love her. But now, looking back, she understood that love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about always getting it right, or always having the answers. Love was about trust. It was about opening your heart to someone and letting them in, even when it was hard. And most importantly, it was about vulnerability, the willingness to show someone the real you, flaws and all. The truth was, Samantha had always thought love would be easy. She thought it would come naturally, and once it did, everything would fall into place. But real love wasn't like that. It was messy. It was hard work, and sometimes it didn't come at all when you thought it would. Her relationship with Daniel hadn't started with smooth sailing. It had started with secrets, misunderstandings, and a whole lot of unanswered questions. But in the end, those challenges had made their love stronger. The pain had made them appreciate the joy. The mistakes had made them realize how much they meant to each other. And as she sat there, watching the sunset, she realized that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the most unexpected encounters. She had never imagined that she would find love in the way she did, through a series of twists and turns, surprises, and heartbreak. But now that she was here, in this moment, with Daniel and their children, she knew that their story was one of a kind. It wasn't a perfect story. There were no guarantees that everything would always be easy, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that they were writing their story together, one filled with love, trust, and the kind of bond that could weather any storm. Samantha's thoughts drifted to the moments when Daniel had finally let his guard down. when he had opened up to her about his fears, about the loneliness he had carried for so long. He had shown her a side of him that he had kept hidden, not just from her, but from everyone. And in that moment, she realized how much they had both changed. They had both become more vulnerable, and that vulnerability had brought them closer than ever before. She thought about the night he had proposed to her under the stars, when he had finally let go of all the fear and uncertainty that had held him back. He had shown her his heart, raw and unguarded, and in doing so, had given her the strength to do the same. Their love was no longer just a dream or a fairy tale. It was real, and it was theirs. As she sat there, surrounded by the beauty of their life together, she realized that it wasn't just about the love they shared now, it was about the journey they had taken to get here. The road hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Their love was real, and that made all the difference. Looking back on everything they had been through, the doubts, the fears, the struggles, it was clear that they had come out stronger. Their love had been tested, and though it had been far from perfect, it had been forged in the fire of their struggles, and now it was unbreakable. The triplets, now growing older by the day, were the living proof of their love. Their laughter filled the house, a constant reminder of the life they had built. And every time Samantha looked at them, she was reminded that love wasn't just about the moments of happiness, it was about the challenges too. It was about sticking together, no matter what, and never giving up on each other. As she looked at Daniel, holding one of their children in his arms, she knew that this was just the beginning. Their story was still being written, and the future was full of possibilities. The love they shared would carry them through whatever came next. And together, they would face it all, with strength, with love, and with hope. As the story of Samantha and Daniel comes to a close, we can't help but reflect on the journey they've taken together. Their path hasn't been easy, but it has been beautiful. They've weathered storms, faced the challenges life threw at them, and most importantly, they've built a family full of love, trust, and hope. It's a love story that proves that even the most unlikely encounters can lead to something incredible. Now, I want to know, what do you think? Can love survive secrets and lies? We saw how Daniel and Samantha struggled with the trust issues and secrets that came between them. They faced so many obstacles, but in the end, they found their way back to each other. If you were in Samantha's shoes, would you have forgiven him? Would you have been able to move past the lies and start over? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Your opinions mean a lot to me, and I can't wait to hear what you think about this journey. What's your take on love and trust? Do you believe it can be rebuilt after everything falls apart, or is it something that's too broken to fix? If you've enjoyed this emotional journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We've got more heartfelt stories coming your way, and I promise you won't want to miss what's next. Our next emotional roller coaster is just around the corner, so stay tuned for more gripping tales that will leave you thinking long after the video ends. Next time, we'll dive into another unforgettable story, one that explores how a single moment can change someone's life forever. Stay tuned for more heartwarming moments, twists you won't see coming, and characters who will capture your heart. Also, I just want to take a moment to thank you for joining me on this incredible journey. Whether you've been with us from the start or if this is your first time here, I'm so grateful to have you as part of this community. The stories we share, the lessons we learn, and the love we experience, these are the things that make life truly worth living. Love, trust, and family, these are the things that bind us all together. They remind us that no matter how difficult life gets, we always have the power to overcome it. With the right people by our side, there's nothing we can't face. Until next time, remember, you never know what surprises life has in store for you. So, keep an open heart, trust the process, and stay tuned for more incredible stories that will remind you what truly matters. Thank you for being here, and I can't wait to have you again soon.